Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Commercial Real Estate Secrets. I'm your host, Austin Hare, and our guest today is Dr. Hunter Smith. He is the co-owner and CEO of GPS Dental. Now, they've currently got 19 locations, and they plan on growing to 25 by the end of the year. So they have some aggressive growth plans. And Hunter, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. How you doing?
Great, Austin. Thanks for having me. It's nice to connect with you again.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. So, what can you tell everybody what states you guys are located in right now?
Yeah, currently GPS supports practices in Arkansas, Tennessee, Indiana, and Missouri, with growth plans in the very immediate future to Oklahoma as well.
Okay. So how did you get involved in this line of work? Did you know that you want to do this for a long time? Was it just kind of coincidence? I mean, can you tell everybody the story of how you got into it?
Yeah, so I'm a dentist by trade. I went to dental school at the UT in Memphis from 2010 to 2014, and I graduated there. And came back to my hometown in Jonesboro with the aspirations of just being a dentist who owned his own practice. I think I was a little bit ahead of um, others in knowing that I wanted to own a practice. For instance, I did that pretty immediately out of school. But in terms of owning and supporting multiple locations through a DSO structure, which are becoming increasingly popular now, um, I didn't really have, and really up until 2 or 3 years after we acquired a few locations, um, didn't really see that as the trajectory that I would be on. It kind of happened organically, which I think really speaks to the story a little bit and the proper way to to approach this type of thing if you're a doctor led and doctor minded DSO structure, and that we didn't seek out to do it, with a big plan of consolidation or anything like that. It just kind of happened organically.
Hmm.
And then kind of in the last couple of years, we've taken a more direct approach to finding locations and working with dentists and partners that we think we could help.
Okay. So what was the first location like that you owned? How long was it before you were, you had acquired your first location or took ownership of that first one? And what was that story like?
Yeah, so we acquired the first location, or I did individually in 2014. So I graduated in May. I immediately went to work in this practice, and then with the intention of buying it, I just kind of worked through the licensing and whatnot.
So did you
And then,
scout this guy out? Were you like, when you were looking for people to work with right out of school, were you specifically looking for a guy who was ready for retirement that you could take over?
No, although people have gotten more sophisticated now. I feel like with the internet and different ways to go and seek out these opportunities. But for me personally, I knew where I needed to go back to my hometown, just for family reasons, and this opportunity presented itself. Um, the seller had an associate or two in place that, with failed transitions, failed in not the sense that someone wasn't able to buy it at the time, not necessarily ended in bad terms or anything like that. So it kind of happened organically for me. I was looking at a lot of different job opportunities at the time, and this one was the winner in my mind. So um, bought
Yeah.
it in August of 14, and then I solo owned that location through for a little over a year before I joined up with my partner, and we bought our first location together in October of 2015.
Now, was that a distress practice? And did you do anything in place to, increase the value significantly?
With the first one,
With the first one, yeah.
yeah, no, it was a well-established, been part of the community for 30 plus years. Doctor stayed on, great practice. You know, we were able to improve it just because, or I was, I guess, because added doctor days, added kind of a business type of mindset for just that was innate, not necessarily sought out to do. Um, but so it definitely improved under leadership of myself and my now COO at GPS. But it definitely wasn't a fixer up or anything like that.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, that's cool. So were you able to secure financing or work out seller financing?
Yeah, it's a great question because it's something people struggle with a lot of early. I think, luckily, I went back to my hometown, so I had a lot of local bank connections. And in fact, this one was my now partner's connection. He had done a startup straight out of school, and he's very well known throughout the community. And introduced me to this local banker who, they liked the story, they liked the dental space. I think they had invested in one or two local companies before. So I was able to secure financing basically through a relationship with a local bank.
Hmm. That's
for
cool.
the first practice.
Now, was the real estate involved in that transaction?
It was not. No, and in fact, the seller still owns the building. It's a 3-unit kind of strip, suite A, B, and C, and I still rent suite A for them.
Okay.
So.
Did you learn anything about real estate and site selection during that process? Like, was there things that he did mostly right in selecting it or mostly wrong? Like, what was your kind of takeaway?
Yeah, my takeaway, coming out of dental school, you barely know how to do dentistry and definitely don't know any business or real estate or anything like that. So I just, frankly, to be honest, at the time, to my detriment, I didn't consider that aspect of it. Now, since I've obviously learned a lot more, and it's not a coincidence that our largest locations that we support are also the most desirable locations and the more I guess beautiful buildings and the more aesthetically pleasing situations happen to coincide with with our better practice or the more profitable practices that we support. Now for this one, I mean, it was built 30 years ago. He did a great job then of identifying a site. It's on a main medical kind of community. It's a well-known part of the city. So he did a lot of things right back then. Now, obviously, the geography of the town has kind of changed in the last 40 years. So maybe there's been some things that maybe it's not location number one in the town anymore. But at the time, it was a very solid location. He did a great job with it.
Okay, cool. So, yeah, it sounds like that kind of taught you the value, like how important the location is, having a good spot, having it look appealing. Because I mean, yeah, I think a lot of times you just don't know what you don't know. Like we hear the old phrase, "If you build it, they will come," and you think like, okay, if you just pull up a spot somewhere, that people will show up, and it's like absolutely not true. Like it's so important and it's so expensive to build out your location, especially in dentistry, right? Especially in healthcare, that if you pick the wrong spot, I mean, you might not ever be able to recover from that. So it's cool that he had kind of done a good job with that. And actually, it sounds like you learned a lot from that too. So how did that segue into, so you were able to pay him out mostly through like he got most of the cash, right? Like he didn't do a seller financing note. And then you sold it later to use that to buy more locations?
We didn't sell it. No, still own the location.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And still part of a supported practice for GPS that myself and we've since added a partner actually who bought into that location alongside us. But no, it's still part of our ecosystem of part of our supported practices. But what we were able to do with it was kind of show proof of concept early on. Just here's how we can take a business, and it was a good business. It was just short of $1 million revenue business, and we were able to take it over that number, improve profitability and bottom line, and really use it as proof of concept for future acquisitions. Where our first really 13 or 14 locations we had through local bank financing and just continuing those relationships and performing when we got the loans and they trusted in us, and it was a good setup for a long time.
Yeah, that's great because I mean, it could take. There's a really hard spot for DSOs, I feel like, which is between one locations and say 4 or 5 locations, because one location is relatively easy to get financing on. You're going to be the operator. There's a lot of stability there. The banks can lend on that because there's a high level of confidence. You're putting everything into it. But it's hard to get to 2 locations now. They get a little bit more sketchy, especially 3, 4. Like, are you spreading your time too thin? These are questions that the bank asking themselves. Is it truly scalable? Are you just getting started? Are you going to come back? You're going to find out later it wasn't a good thing. And it's great that you're able to secure that to help you guys early on, because there's kind of like this dark tunnel that you have to go through until you can prove scalability, like you said, but that usually doesn't happen until 5 locations. So it sounds like having those relationships is what really made all the difference for you guys in those initial stages.
Yeah, a lot of our selling doctors stayed on with us. I mean, we were purposely not targeting like in terms of the way we target locations now, but we knew that our dental bandwidth was limited. So we needed these sellers to stay on with us. We looked for opportunities where we could be supplementary to the dentistry, but also not have to be the primary providers for it. So it grew organically in that way. Also, a lot of the locations for us early on, to your point, where we were going from 1 to 5 or 6, those are more local. Now we've kind of stretched across 5 states. But early, I mean, all these were practices that we could drive to and support from a clinical standpoint, or be there for a lunch meeting, say, and then back home to see patients at 2 o'clock or whatever. So it was more of a local and regional feel at that time. And with our regional bank contacts, that worked out nicely.
That's great. That's great. Okay. So you guys you brought on a partner for, you bought this one by yourself. You brought on a partner, right? Before you started your second location. And
Yeah.
what was that like? How long before you guys really were able to pick it up? Was it in a good spot, you know?
Yeah, I had one and he had one, actually. We graduated dental school together and had known each other since college. Um, and both of our selling doctors had stayed on. So we really got that third location, our first together, in order to kind of get busier clinically. And I was going to work it 2 days and he was going to work it 2 days. And we were going to work our respective practices, the other 3 and 3, for a 5-day a week kind of total. And then our selling doctors were still there and he was staying at the practice we bought together. So that was the intention of partnering together, was just to have it was a practice about an hour or so outside of our hometown where our other 2 practices were, and we thought we could partner on it. Once we added a couple other ones, it's actually interesting. Before we even did that together, we did some residential real estate, and since we've done a few commercial real estate deals together, I think we joke that we're more connected financially than either of us are to our spouses. I mean, we got a lot of stuff together on the business front, but we did residential real estate together, and then we sought the practice out.
So that was okay. So let's talk about that a little bit. I think the listeners have a lot of interest in real estate. So did you guys start with single family or multifamily or duplexes? What was the play there?
Yeah, single family homes. We really bought a bunch of them in a lump amount of time. Like in a 6-month span, we bought like I think 12 single family. Then they were kind of conglomerated in the city. We hired a property manager about halfway through that process, who still kind of manages and maintains that for us to this day. The idea at the time was to transition from single family to multifamily to duplexes to triplexes into the commercial real estate, and basically just use the cash flows and the I guess the equity built into those locations to take those steps up. We got kind of distracted with the DSO game and the dental practice side of the business.
How dare
and we kind of got into commercial.
How dare your dental job get in the way of your house hobby?
Yeah, seriously. Well, we thought it'd be more passive. I mean, and it turned out we tried to find a way to make dentistry passive, and then we did till the business got too big, and then now it's our full-time job to run it. So, but we kind of skipped a few steps and got into the commercial real estate space by virtue of our main business, where obviously they play into each other. So we also own 2 or 3 of our practice buildings, and then we have a commercial real estate investment space where our admin will be headquartered, and we have a few tenants in there as well. So we've kind of dabbled in all of those areas.
Okay. So you thought that I missed what you said there. You thought the DSO would be more passive, or the residential real estate would be more passive?
We thought real estate would be the more passive play.
Yeah.
And that was kind of
quite as passive.
Well, it definitely is not without some kind of property managing or something like in our experience. We knew it was time to hire a property manager from our perspective. Like, I lived in the neighborhood where 2 of our houses were that we had bought with the intention of renting. And I was so lazy that I didn't take the for rent signs down and stick them in the yard. So we were pretty sure at that time, like, okay, we need a property manager, someone who's actually going to do the job that I should be doing. So, and then the tenant turnover. And it's a college town, so we'll turn over tenants in these single family homes, about a couple times a year in some cases. Although we try to do 2 or 3 year leases. So just the turnover and the maintenance of having tenants move in and out, and then also the constant renting of the individual locations was not passive for us.
I'm glad you brought that up. People ask us about residential real estate a lot, and my answer is that it's a great starting point. That's how I look at it, but it's not passive income. Passive, what's truly passive income would mean it doesn't really take up any of your time or attention, right? And the only way you can really truly 100% get that is like in the stock market. And then there's obviously inherent risk, right? So the way that we kind of explain it is like, start out with residential. They're usually smaller amounts of money required up front. You can grow and scale that way. The banks are really lenient, or they're really willing to finance, single family homes compared to other things. And but be prepared, because you're gonna have to put time into it, right? Like, what you don't have to put is either time or money. You're going to be putting in one of those two resources. So if you're not putting in more money, you're going to be putting in more time. And absolutely, like, you can get that recurring income, right? But not necessarily passive, because like you said, until you hire a property manager, you're going to have to be doing stuff. And it takes, you're not going to, it doesn't make sense to necessarily get a property manager for just one property. So you got to scale up a little bit. It sounds like you guys got to, what'd you say, 6 or 12 residential units?
Yeah, we got to 6 when we hired the property manager, and then ended up before we got distracted around 10 or 12. We've
Yeah.
since sold a few, but so I think we have like 8 now.
And were these off-pocket listings? Like, were you getting them for good deals? How'd you find out about them?
There were developments in different areas. So we got in with a real estate broker who had some contractor relationships. So as the houses got built, and they were all new construction homes, every single one of them, which was nice from a maintenance standpoint early on. But also we were paying top dollar for them, so we weren't really. They were highly levered deals. Luckily, they've appreciated to the point that we got a lot of equity in them, but we didn't at the time. It was more of definitely a long-term play for us.
So not necessarily,
or at least
month to month.
No. We never took any cash out, and to this day haven't. From a cash flow standpoint, they're not cash flow properties for us exactly. We intended to kind of let them appreciate, pay down the debt via tenants, and then roll those into, like I talked about earlier, bigger multifamily or commercial facilities. And to an extent we've done that, and to another extent we still have them, and they've appreciated. So luckily we've been able to refinance since then, and they do cash flow a little bit better under new terms, lower debts. But we don't use them as cash flowing properties.
Okay, that's cool. And then how did that segue into commercial real estate?
Yeah, for us, the segue was more acquisition based with dental practices. We had a couple of sellers who wanted the building sold. We had luckily done some real estate deals with the residential stuff. Certainly nothing to be an expert or really even know what we were getting into, but we were going to be the owner occupied tenant, so it was a little less risky. And then we kind of segued that experience into a bigger space that we were looking for our administrative group. So GPS, the DSO, actually has a handful of employees who are not associated with any particular underlying practice. So we needed a space for that infrastructure as well. So we bought our first real big commercial real estate property, which is I think it's 7 units. Yeah, 7 units, of which we occupy 1. And kind of issues mainly on the lending side. The things, not necessarily how to look for tenants or that side of the business, or how to make improvements or anything like that. Really, what the experience I'm talking about is just buying and doing a real estate transaction with a bank, or with lending, and kind of how to get that process, and not so much the actual ownership on a going forward basis.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It's kind of like, if there were steps to real estate, then the way I would describe it is like, step 1 is a single family, in the single family space. Step 2 would be multifamily, whether that's duplex, triplex, quadplex. And then step 3 is like commercial, because they just require so much more capital up front, and a little bit of experience. And that could be anything from like apartment units, like entire apartment units, to retail centers, to industrial centers, to whatever. But it seems like, there's kind of like these steps that people go across. And now if you can go from step 1 to, you can skip step 1 and 2, I mean, great, like, power to you. But it kind of paints out like a relatively clear path for the average Joe to start getting invested in real estate to some extent. So, but yeah, so now, okay, you've kind of been doing this all along as you've been growing your practice. So, now we'll step back into the DSO hat that you wear from, and you were 2 locations with your partner. And you guys just, at that stage, you just decided to officially make this thing happen, like put together. Is that when you came up with the name? Is that when you said like, hey, I'm going to make this thing grow? What kind of sparked that? Because you said originally when you got into it, you didn't necessarily have the intention of making, an entire DSO with a bunch of locations. So what changed, and when did that happen?
Yeah, I won't go through every acquisition just because it'd probably be boring, but the early 4 or 5, I mean, I think tells the story, because we one of them was just an add-on that we had worked at a practice that my partner had worked in before. Another one was connected to the space that he had. So it was kind of a merger situation. So early on, we ramped up to 4 or 5 just organically because we'd either worked the practice or they were associated with the practices we'd already bought, or the selling doctor would stay on. Really, it was the location number 6 for us. It was the first one kind of outside of our city immediately drivable area practice that we could actually work. And it was an associate instead of a selling doctor. So it was a little bit different dynamic between who the provider was going to be within the practice. At that time, another good example of the way it really showed the separation is a lot of dental practices are named after, whoever it is, Dr. Smith, DDS, family dentistry, or something like this. This location was the first one we were going to have to change that and brand it. And so at the time we were calling ourselves like Southern Dental Group. So all of our practices that we currently support that were selling doctors who left or an unbranded location, you'll still see the name Southern Dental of. And that was the initial trajectory. And then, when I stepped out of dentistry was probably location number 10-ish. So 4 or 5 after that, maybe a year or 2 later, where my time demands became so much more non-clinical versus clinical that I stepped out completely. That's when GPS was really formed at the end of 2017, where we started making our administrative only hires, people who didn't work in the practice. I didn't work in practices anymore. And we really that was the birth of GPS, the management company, DSO, whatever, MSO, whatever the term you want to use for it, and really started to support those underlying practices from a centralized source. So that probably was location-ish number 10 at the end of 2017, about 2 years after myself and my partner bought our first practice together to work clinically.
Okay. So what kind of practices are you guys targeting right now?
Yeah, that's really involved. Early on, it was any that we thought that we could, either add to value-wise clinically with big hygiene bases, with big reproducible doctors. But with local bank financing and local lending, and I'm sure you see this in the real estate world as well, banks lend under different criteria than maybe a institutional investor or a more cash flow investing type of lender, middle market lenders at some of the bigger national banks. So when you're dealing with local and regional banks who underwrite to a percentage of collections for a practice or something like that, you're really limiting the type of practice you can go after. So a lot of our, call it under $1 million revenue locations, were those early practices where we needed to, that was really the only type of lending we had available. In the last, since we've had our institutional backing, now we're kind of looking at geographies and regions that we want to be in, and then picking, really good locations and good partners within those geographies and then building around them. So now I would say our most recent partnerships, for instance, were a $5 million location, a $2 million location, another $2.5 million location, an $8.3 million 2-practice location. So that's kind of evolved throughout time. And a lot of it has to do with sophistication of the infrastructure of the management, for sure, but also the type of lending that you have and the type of equity that you can put into deals to get them closed up. Deals are definitely getting more expensive. I'm sure you've had a bunch of guests on the podcast that can speak to that as well. It's not a 70%. Yeah, very. It's not a 70 or 80% of collections anymore type of thing where you're dealing with, just whoever the seller is, and maybe they have a representative from Henry Schein or AFCO or something like that. I mean, now we have larger M&A advisors coming to these larger groups, and they're selling for big multiples of EBITDA and multiples of the profit of the business. So deals are definitely getting more expensive and competitive.
And so for you guys, when you come and you look at a practice that you're interested in purchasing and taking over, do you have any rules of thumbs, reach out to 100, have conversations with 20, make offers on 10, accept 1, anything like that?
Not a game plan necessarily like that. No, I will say that statistically, we probably look at 5 practices for every one that we end up making an offer for. And then of the ones we make an offer for, about half of those close. And that's, I would say our hit rate's pretty good on offers versus acceptance. I think we're really creative in deal structure. With the type of backing we have, we can be aggressive on the ones we want to go after. So I think the hit rate's pretty good there once we actually make the offer. But we are pretty selective, mainly around provider. I mean, we don't want to come in and try to replace providers, replace staffs. I mean, no one does, but us specifically target a very robust patient-based, hygiene-based side where the doctor is more replaceable, for lack of a better word. That doesn't mean they don't do a great job clinically, but maybe their skill sets are not the reason that their practice is successful. It's more the patient base that they've built. Those practices, I think we support better. I think we can recruit to better, and that's what we kind of target. But
You try
we
and keep
don't
the
go in.
doctors on most of the time?
Yeah, that's evolved as well, but early on, absolutely. And really, what we think now is, do we have a provider solution for 2 years immediately following acquisition? And if whether that's an associate or the seller staying on, or whatever that situation may be, as long as that answer that's kind of check mark number one when we're looking at a deal.
And how can they partner with you when you're looking to acquire a new location and bring on a new provider?
We've done a variety of different partnership avenues. We've had docs buy into our existing infrastructure and existing practices. We value all those equity pieces the same way as a multiple of EBITDA, and every one of our partners have bought in under that same terms. So we've done that a handful of times. We've had practice partners acquire alongside us, so they would come to us with the deals. We would help fund that deal and help get it closed up, and provide the management infrastructure. They would go in to be the clinical partner on site. We've done those. And then we've had equity role situations with selling doctors who wanted to partner with a DSO or a larger group for that infrastructure, or for those economies of scale, or for that support. And they rolled equity back in as part of the purchase. So we've kind of done 3 different avenues of partnership. All of them have been successful. And we would be open to any of those types on a go-forward basis.
Yeah, no, that's good. I think that, it's obviously more enticing the more options you can have for people to get involved from an equity level. Because you don't ever know what the individual wants. Everybody's goals are different and their timelines are different.
Yeah, and I think it's worth mentioning as well that our partners are equity owners at the practice level, not necessarily like a holdco level or something like that you may see at this is not a knock on them. They're obviously one of, if not the best in the business, like a Heartland or something like that, where they have stock options or ESOPs for their employees at a top holdco level. Ours are more granular. They're at the practice level. There's monthly distributions. They participate in the same way a solo owner would for their practices. They just have a partner who provides that management infrastructure. So it's more of a partnership than a owning stock would be. I'll say it like that.
I guess the benefit is they have more direct control over it, right? There's obviously benefits both ways, like you mentioned. But in this situation, you're not necessarily punished if there's a bunch of underperforming locations or underperforming doctors that have nothing to do with you.
Exactly. Yeah, they're more tied to what they can control, for sure. And if we go spend a bunch of money on a location or really lever a deal or something like that, or we have an underperforming practice, that it doesn't affect them. It's more almost like little pods. A great way that I've heard it described is, and we do it for real estate as well, where the partners own their buildings that they participate in. I've heard it described like that the DSO is the NFL. And then we have underlying sub DSOs where these partners live and they're under practices. And those are the kind of the teams within the NFL. So the NFL supports those teams and they provide the structure in the league for those teams to play in. And then our partners are kind of the teams. They can run their team however they want, and some of them do better and some of them do worse. But the teams, I guess the big difference is they're not actively competing, but they're still under that same infrastructure of the NFL.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. So, going through it now, and you've had, 19 locations, I think 20 transactions. You've seen a lot of the specific sites. What kind of trends do you see that work out the best? Like, in terms, are you seeing consistencies in these places in retail plazas versus office plazas, and street visibility, signage, population density? You're not necessarily selecting the sites because you're doing acquisitions, but are you noticing things in terms of the real estate that the successful locations you guys acquire all have in common?
I would say the biggest thing that I was wrong about, and I think it's fine to say that. I mean, I'm an egotistical guy, so it's kind of hard, but I certainly was wrong about it early on. And maybe it's just the geography that we were doing deals in. I didn't think it was that important, frankly. With digital marketing and the way that patients kind of get to your practice in today's world. I thought, no, it doesn't matter. They type in the address at Google and they go and they get there, and it doesn't matter the location, blah, blah, blah. And I'd heard some old heads talk about it and thought that they were old heads and didn't know what they were talking about. And as now I've acquired a bunch of practices and looked at a bunch of deals, it's undeniable that our larger locations are the ones that are in more, are in better locations, or more visible, are more aesthetically pleasing. I mean, I know it's hard to quantify that, but I mean, if you judged our locations based on the aesthetics internally of the practice, the way it looks and feels, that's going to really match up nicely with the revenues of those locations. And I think it can't really be a coincidence anymore. So it matters in an intangible way that, kind of these young data-driven guys who think they know everything, which I was one of, can't really quantify. But if you look at the true numbers, the anecdotes, it's undeniable. So
Right.
I was wrong on it. In terms of, more specifically to answer your question, I haven't noticed a huge difference in myself, and this could be naivety, but in like a strip mall versus a second floor medical plaza or anything like that. Obviously, those are worse locations than maybe a standalone building would be. But what I've seen more important is just eyeballs, ability to see the practice. Once you get into practice, how do you feel? And I think the intangible about that is, if you're a patient going to this, thinking of it from this perspective, if you're a patient going to the office, even if you really love your dentist and do a great job, you're not going to go brag about it, or you're not going to go brag about your care or something like that if there's something that you can poke a hole in. Whereas if you go and you get like A+ care from a the way it feels standpoint, and it's easy to say, oh, it's right over there by Walmart or whatever. It's easier to describe how to get there. You want to talk about your experience more than the dental work that you got. It's just easier for patients to internally refer to a location like that, and that's been way more valuable than I gave it credit for in the past.
Yeah, it's cool. Talking about the aesthetics of it reminds me of, like, we did a podcast with a guy who focuses on scent for like DSOs. And that was his whole thing, is like, once you're in, what kind of impression do you have? His name was Daniel Zimmern. He's one of the other podcasts we did, but it was really fascinating thinking about like the impact that smell has on you, and how some people are becoming, like, the luxury brands have it down, and some people are becoming like so intentional with their smell. But yeah, it goes in relation to, it's like the visualization part of it, the aesthetic part of it really helps get people in the door. And then smell was just something that I never really thought was a big factor, but it's one of your most powerful senses. I mean, have you guys played with that at all? Have you guys thought about that?
Yeah, there's a variety of companies that provide things like that. Cincy comes to mind. There's different, now more powerful, kind of self-contained um, scent makers, I guess, or whatever they would be called. You can pump it through the air vents. I mean, you can do all kinds of stuff with it. It's definitely something that's intentionally done in dental offices because they, you don't want to smell a burning tooth or anything like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Toothpaste in there. So
Burning tooth can have some bad connotations or memories for a lot of people.
exactly. So, and that's just another thing that's really intangible, hard to quantify. But, if you're as a patient, you may love your dentist and you want to go there and not have any intention to change. But if you notice every single time you walk in a tooth dust smell or a bad smell, I mean, you're going to think about that when you go to refer your friend. Whereas if it's a really pleasant smell and you get a scented towel or something with your visit, and there's TVs overhead and you're relaxed and you have headphones, those are things that you're going to feel comfortable referring someone to. So that's kind of what I'm talking about when I say the aesthetics and the feel of the practice that just matter way more than I gave it credit for. Not just from internal or external new patients, but for your existing patients to feel comfortable referring their friends and family there because they know that they're going to get not only great dental care, but it's going to feel more, just professional.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So what's your guys' strategy moving forward? What's your plan, and your goals and your tangibles and stuff like that?
Yeah, we're targeting geographies. We want the major metros around the kind of southeast, although we're not limited to that. We want to build around great partners and great dentists who want the support of a DSO infrastructure. Um, and we're just targeting those hotter areas. So I think that speaks to the real estate and the location aspect of this. The different spots that we're looking are just hot real estate markets as well. People want to be there. People want to move there. They have need for providers. Associates and partners want to be there. So that's kind of what our go forward strategy is in terms of where we're going to be. We just want to continue to support docs. I think we're scalable up to several locations. We're private equity backed. With debt at this point, and we'll continue to scale up through that and add locations and doctors that we think we can help.
Great. So, if anybody wants to reach in touch or reach out and get in touch, what would be a good way to contact you guys?
Yeah, the website has a link for contact if it's a partnership, or someone's interested in acquiring a practice alongside us or becoming a partner within the organization or selling us their practice. The website, gpsdds.com. It's certainly a way. There's contact points there that'll go directly to our team, so we can reach back out. Me personally, I'm pretty available via email, hsmith@gpsdds.com. I answer lots of emails around practice valuations and ways of thinking of partnerships and businesses in the dental space. So I enjoy that conversation. So I welcome that for sure, and would be glad to speak with anybody who felt the desire to ask me a question. So
great. Yeah, I went ahead and put those down in the show notes so people can reach out. And you're going to any physical events this year? Any summits this year? I know limited because of COVID, but do you have anything?
Yeah. I don't right now. I mean, we're really busy with acquisitions through probably the beginning of summer, which is a nice problem to have.
Yeah.
So I'll be traveling, but it'll be to do that. In terms of conferences and stuff like that. And I'm glad that they're coming back. It was a weird year last year, so I'm looking forward to getting to see some of friends and stuff in the industry out there. But no immediate plans to attend at this point. So. Not because of COVID, just from a time perspective. So.
Oh, that's great. Well, hey, thanks so much for sharing your advice and your story for all the listeners. It's great hearing you guys done an amazing job. I mean, you've been growing very fast, and it seems like you're going to continue to grow fast. And so we appreciate your time, and I think the listeners appreciate your time as well.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, and I look forward to working with you guys over at your place on a couple projects as well. So looking forward to it.
Yeah, likewise. So do we.